Yes, and we're live. So, hello everyone. Welcome to the 20th episode now of the Armory Roundtable. So, we're reaching a round number, small celebration. Today, sorry for the delay last week, but both Martin got sick, then I got sick, and it was just not meant to be. But tonight we kind of recoup the missed episode, and we have Martin Fabian here, and we're going to talk about some really cool stuff. So, Martin, if you want to tell us a little bit about yourself, and thank you for joining, first of all, and yeah, if you want to introduce yourself, the floor is yours.
Thank you for the invitation and good evening, everybody who's watching at this late hour on Sunday. My name is Martin Fabian. I'm a professional fencer and sword maker. I've been in the business, I'm in general business of sword fighting for 22 years now, which is a long time, but I started young, so I'm not that old. I am uh, well, like I said, I am also like a sword maker, so I co-own the company which is known as SIGI or SIGI Forge, which makes feathers and belongs to one of the largest sword producers right now. And my hobbies and passions, besides fencing, are photography, hiking, and stuff. I also have a beautiful dog that I like to walk, and that's about it.
Really cool. So, I guess we could start with the basic question, which is how did you get into all of this, and what was the driving force, let's say, behind your passion?
This is quite easy because when I was like 14, Lord of the Rings came out, and I was really hooked on fantasy in general, like the Witcher books, not the series, of
Mhm.
course. And we had a group which was like more like a stage combat performance, reenactment, and stuff. And that was back in my hometown, and I decided to join them at one point. And I was really lucky because back in that time, I mean, the fencing was a little different, but my coach who taught me as first one was a really good coach. So, and coincidentally, we spent all summer fencing every single day. So he gave me really a lot and sparked my passion for fencing extremely. I did stage combat because that was what was available generally back by then for 3 years. And then at around 2006, I started going deep into the original sources or the fencing manuscripts, and that has taken a hold of me and holds me up to this day.
Yeah, I guess it's you go by steps, right? You start wetting your feet, then you get more into the rabbit hole, and then it's hard to get out. By the way, if anyone hears any, we were just discussing this before we started. If there's any audio imbalance, like one of us is super loud versus the other, just let me know and I can correct audio levels. So, out of all these hats you kind of wore in terms of passion for swords, which one do you think is the one that fits you best? And have you has like your focus changed a lot over the years, or have you always distributed your energy more or less um, in the
Was
same ways?
absolutely flabbergasted by historical manuals. Like this was like a really strong drug for me because y I mean, it's perhaps a bit difficult to explain for people who didn't do stage combat. Like stage combat was absolutely fantastic. We had a lot of fun and we traveled through most of Europe, like doing live shows and stuff. And I am quite an adventurous spirit, so I always enjoy the audience and stuff. But there was something lacking in the fencing. It didn't like really click. And even when we wanted to do some sparring or something, I mean, the things that we learned didn't really work for me. And I was always telling myself like, ah, I have to get better in this. And but that there really wasn't like a way how to get better besides the performative side of the things. So when I discovered the original sources and started reading like deeply, then I realized that everything makes sense. That suddenly everything like clicked. I suddenly realized that they were talking to me in a real way, how to perform like real fencing, how to connect strikes, how to hit someone, how to be a better fencer in general. So ever since I found out, and I read the proclamations in the all German manuscripts would say like this is the real fencing. This comes from the best masters in the world. I mean, I've been sold completely, and for me, it was a bit like becoming Indiana Jones, but not entirely, of course, because there was no rock running behind me. But you know, the ability or the option for us to read something which was written by people who are long dead, something which kind of died out, although that might not be the proper term, and then getting it moving, suddenly like understanding their instructions and what they were saying, that was something amazing. That was amazing. That like so many things clicked in me. And this experimental archaeology was perhaps like the biggest factor why I got
Mm.
so hooked in fencing because you know I mean it also gives transforms into life. So for instance, if you really go make all the work to read and all that guy's work and then to try to translate it into a physical art and even to get to move it into a certain next level, uh, it also translates to other forms of life. So I felt like full. I felt the call has been fulfilling, and that's more or less it.
Cool. And well, in the meantime, I'll quickly say hi to Julian and Maike. So, hi guys, thank you for joining. And in terms of treatises and sources, what was your entry level? What was your gateway drug, let's say, and how did you escalate the habit?
You mean a gateway drug to the sources in general?
Yeah, in terms of which one was your first one, the one that got you hooked, and how did you
Oh,
then?
uh, yesterday I was working something on my computer, and my girlfriend noticed that I'm using a software which is called like Total Commander. Are you familiar with it? Yeah,
No.
it's so it's like a software which kind of is similar to a software which has been used back in the 90s. It was called Norton Commander. It was like a really, really old thing before we even used Windows. I mean, I was a small kid, but I still remember it. So now, if I tell people that there was a guy who had a CD with burnt on scans of manuscripts, and if you knew that guy and if you were friends, he was, so good that perhaps they burned it for you and gave you the CD. So that was how I got a hold of a number of like a dozen manuscripts.
Mm.
There was there were scans of Joachim Meyer, there were scans of Talhofer, and Jakub Sutor. So mostly stuff which is not really useful when you're like a super beginner, because I couldn't for the hell of thing understand Joachim Meyer back then because my old German wasn't that developed, and Talhofer didn't make sense at all because basically there was no like a text which would tell you, right? And then I was lucky to get contact on Anton Kohutovic. Perhaps some people know him. He is also a very good fencer and also has got a really nice channel here on YouTube. I think many people can say that they were super inspired by his Tornhau video and stuff. So nevertheless, Anton was already doing some research for a few years, and he also owned some manuscripts, and he told me and he gave me a few clues. I mean, everything was like so secretive back then, right? So he told me like, "Oh, you should rather start with Danzig than with Meyer." Right? I was like, "Danzig, what is that?" So then I started browsing and looking for things, and I was really lucky to find a transcription that was uploaded by some Polish guys. I think it was arma.pl. So I found the transcription of the so-called Peter von Danzig manuscript. I think
Mhm.
nowadays it's more known as a Starenberg Fechtbuch, and also other versions of the glossa. So there was a Yud Lev or Ju Lu. I mean, also we just call it like that. It's not really a Julius manuscript, but we call it like that. I found Speyer and Paulus Kahl, and those were my gateway drugs because I could really understand it. So here's the thing: I ever since I was like super little, when I was like 2 or 3 years old, after the communism or socialism fell, a lot of people in Slovakia got first satellite dishes, and everything was suddenly the Western world became available to us, and all day long I was just watching German TV. So I was exposed to German TV as soon as I could like talk and generally understand things. So I learned to speak and I mostly understand German by watching
Mhm.
TV. So, and the fun fact is, for some reason, or for this particular reason, I could also understand to a large degree old German manuscripts. And even though the grammar was like weird, but coincidentally, when I was like trying to read the things aloud, it made a lot of sense, and it really hooked me up. Okay, so I originally started doing just some notes on the dancing material, like I should do this, I should do this, and then I realized that the whole glossas or the commentaries that we have available with those works, that they are so short that I started like translating it straight, and then I made like a let's say a huge composite translation from all those different manuscripts with written differences. That was like 2007,
Mhm.
and that was like a great head start because it really has shown it really made a lot of sense compared to back then when I wanted to try to start with Joachim Meyer, and that was the gateway drug. So definitely Danzig, Leo, and
Okay.
also of course Ringeg and stuff like that.
Cool. And as you talk, it's really interesting because you're essentially describing the same things we see people doing in documents at the time. So adding comments, translating, giving their kind of trying to figure out what is being said and everything. Um, it's yeah, I think it's really cool, and we'll talk about it as we get to your book. But it kind of opens up this whole world of relatability to how people in the past lived and trained and viewed their craft and passion, let's say. So that's really, really cool. I just before getting into the book, I wanted to ask you a little bit about the HEMA scene in Slovakia as you kind of joined. It's always interesting to see. I think everyone is aware of how things developed in the English-speaking world, let's say, because we're more exposed to it. But then every country seems to have its own little timeline and way the community was born. So, what can you say about that?
So fencing, and when we say about when we talk about the history of fencing, we usually say that it starts in Czechoslovakia because let's say the original roots for fencing in here were sometime in the 1960s, where first groups of we call them like historical fencing emerged, right? They were doing, of course, stage combat and performances and stuff, and it sort of grew into a folklore. So when I say it
Mhm.
grew into folklore, it means that almost every weekend during summer, if you went to some castle or to some ruin, there was like a big feast or a reenactment festival full of fencers, like fencers everywhere, up to the point that when I started, 2003, there were like 80 or 90 groups in Slovakia. Mind you, Slovakia is like a small country. We only have like 5 million people. So that means a lot of fencing groups. And since it became kind of part of our folklore, it was like everywhere. I mean, you could feel it everywhere, right? And then at around, I think it was 1999 or 2000, the Trnava Fencing Guild started to exist. I mean, those guys were basically teenagers, so they started dealing with reconstruction of what we understand today as HEMA, and then gradually after a few years also the remainder of groups like changed their specialty from stage combat into HEMA. So nowadays, I mean, we're still a small country, so nowadays there are like maybe 15 or 16 clubs which
Mhm.
do HEMA in Slovakia, with most of them being at the on the western side of the country. And we think the last census, when we were counting the fencer, point to about 300 active fencers. Okay,
Okay.
and probably the two most known clubs are Trnava Fencing Guild and Bratislavský šermiarsky spolok, Bratislava Fencing Guild, which is my club. So we're the largest, but there are also like many other very good clubs in the northern part, Cechtera de Selina, and many, many others. So we're a small country, but I think that the results of our fencers, mainly the competitive results, speak for themselves. So yeah, so that's how
Cool.
fencing went
But
on.
ironically, there's almost less clubs than there used to be in the '60s or organizations. Well, it was also Czechoslovakia at the time, so there was extra. part of land. But yeah, interesting. Okay, let's not. Well, we see a comment here. So Russ Mitchell, historical fencer, movement expert. Love seeing the Slovak fencers. Crisp, clean, aggressive, great tempo play. So you get your first national compliment here. Thank you,
Thank you,
Russ.
Russ.
Okay, let's get into the book because I think that is really well, it's the core of tonight's conversation. So here is the book if you haven't seen the cover yet. It's well, I was just telling Martin before, it's a really cool, nicely made book. Like it's high quality, good paper, hardback. It's if you're in the market for a well-made book, this is one of them. But it's the content that counts more, I guess, than the form in this case. So do you want to tell us a little bit of how you, well, maybe first we can talk a little bit about Medel and then how you kind of chose to, or maybe we can talk a little bit about how you got to know Hans Medel because you had a bit of a love-hate relationship with him.
So back in the 2000s, the times when I started dealing with fencing, I mean, I made sorry, pardon my French, I almost was cursing
No
here.
worries.
So with a huge number of translations, I was just like, oh, I was obsessed, with finding new material for fencing because it always like I found some new detail which elevated the understanding of KDF or historical fencing in general. And in 2009, I visited and I visited the what's called. I visited Augsburg and the Augsburg University Library, and I was really lucky to get my hands on. I think it was like 7, 8, or 9. I don't really remember the precise number. Original fencing books. That was a really nice experience. Like the guy came with a bunch of books, and I could like look at it. I could see like the original books, which were originally held by or owned by Paulus Hector Meyer, right? And one of those books was the Hans Medel's treatise. It's a nice book. It's in a format of A4. And as I was going through pictures, I was like, oh, not many pictures, nothing new. I mean, this doesn't look interesting. It's like too much Renaissance. I wanted to see new Liechtenauer and stuff. So I wasn't really happy about it, but I was like, yeah, new fencing book, whatever. So then I got to meet Peter Żakowski, which is he's like probably the biggest Czech expert on historical arms, and people dealing with medieval arms probably know him because he published multiple books which deal with historical weapons. And for instance, he made like a really thick book about messers, probably a best book ever on messers, his dissertation. And Peter used to be a fencer before, and he also made some of his own transcriptions. And one of the old transcriptions he made back in the 90s, which is like important thing to say, was with this Hans Medel. And he also knew it's like a bit weird, the whole thing with Hans Medel. And he said that he will provide me with a transcription for free if I make a translation for him. And I said, like, yeah, whatever, man, give me like 2 days and I will just give you the translation, right? Because when you're in the thing, like the German isn't that difficult as language if you know some of the basics, and historical manuscripts are really easy to read. Okay, don't let anyone tell you otherwise. Okay, maybe Joachim Meyer or Paulus Hector Meyer are difficult, but most of the traditional Liechtenauerian books are really easy to read because it's the same stuff which repeats itself. And if you miss a word or two, you just go into the vocabulary and you find it. It's like reading the Bible. It's always the same stuff. So I started working with the book, and it was like kind of easy. I was like, yeah, I mean, this is like typical Liechtenauer, typical Liechtenauer. And then it was like, and the book started getting really, really weird because. So the thing is, I mean, for people who don't know, Lichtenauer, or the works that we have available from him or his pupils, whatever, those glossas are usually copies of each other. Okay, so it means that uh, you find the text, and then there are like three, maybe four different versions of that particular text. Okay, sometimes there are little changes and additions, like sometimes one of those guys has like you do it on the right side, the other guy just writes like you do it right. So there's these tiny little details, but more or less there is some consistency within those sources, right?
Hmm.
And the thing is, Medel is completely different. So, for instance, even starting with the guards, okay? So, for instance, in a typical Liechtenauer fencing, we recognize like 4+1+1 guards, all right? And all people know that, for instance, here we hold the ox, down below we hold the flug, Langort, I mean, Langort is the same. Then we have like Alber, which points down and stuff. And Medal has a different system. He says like, this is Alber, this is ox, and this is like flug, right? And the thing is like your whole knowledge and understanding of the sources is built on these like basic stuff, right? So this is like the first thing which doesn't make sense, and then he says like, okay, so you start here in the flug and da da da, and you have to reconfigure your brain like completely. So that's the first thing. The second thing, most of his techniques are not like radically different. And when I say radically different, we're still talking about sword fighting. We have two arms or two hands, all right? There's the sword, and
Hmm.
there's a limited number of things that you can perform with a sword. So, I mean, principially, there it's always sword fighting, but he has a very different system. So he uses different nomenclature for some of the tricks. Some of the master strikes, as we call them, or secret strikes, are
Hmm.
very different to what we know. So it's very difficult to work with. So my initial thoughts back when I was like super conservative, full on Liechtenauerian fencer were like, what the hell? What is this? Like, is this guy on drugs? This doesn't make any sense. This is so weird. I don't want to see it. So I threw it away. And I still have the original translation I made for Peter. And I ended up after a few pages, I was like, I can't do this, Peter. I can't do this. This is like so strange, right? So yeah. So I just was like, this is not for me. Then every few years, when I went through some other source, I kind of returned back to it because I was like, I have to do this. I mean, it cannot be that I cannot decipher this. Like it's
Hmm.
pretty much straightforward. I mean, you can get into it, but always it was so difficult to understand that it was always kind of frustrating to work with it. And back last year, I was having a discussion with Brian Puckett, American fencer. He's also like writing a very interesting book. I can't talk about it, but I can say like really everybody should be looking forward because it will be really groundbreaking. Brian, finish it. This is for you. Nevertheless, we were discussing something about medal, and I still was on fire after finishing Fechtbuch Fabian. You know, when you write something for a few months, like I don't know, it was 4 or 5 months of working with Fechtbuch Fabian. It's a lot of work, and you're used to working, I don't know, 8, 10 hours a day, just like typing, and you're completely in the mental state which is known as the flow, right? So I was like, give me another book. I will break metal. I will learn how to do it. All right. So I finally sat with metal, and I went really deep with it. And I think it was the right time and right place because even if I really tried those, I don't know, those 10 or 15 years ago, I wouldn't be able to get into it that much because I, and generally, I think the whole HEMA scene, we were lacking the experience to fully understand the work. Okay.
Hmm.
And when I say lacking the experience, of course, I mean mechanically, it's not difficult to get into a particular fencing work because mechanically they say, like, put your hands here, do this. All right. But
Hmm.
there is a layer which is already atop of it, and a lot of people use these buzzwords lately, which is like strategy and tactics and like the higher fencing or the higher level of
Hmm.
fencing. And I think it is right now, after a decade of competitive experience, after a few more emerged fencing books, which enabled us to see and praise some of the changes which do appear in medal, allow us in general, not just me, because I'm just the one who decided to work with it now, but I mean there would be someone else probably, and there were some other people who also worked with the text before. So it was right now when everything started to click and started to work together in a better way.
Okay, cool. And I'm struggling to kind of kick off the question line because there's so much interesting stuff in the book because it's not just a fencing treatise in a sense. It's not just medal, but there's a whole bunch of documents that give a lot of information about the kind of social and social context of the fencing schools, which also informs a lot of the things we can see and we can read into that. There are names. There's a lot of really cool stuff. So maybe premise, we don't know much about Medal at all, but what can we kind of say about him and his environment, let's say, in terms of what did the book help you learn about him or
Okay,
the
so
world he
I will
lived in?
talk a bit more in depth about the full content. Okay, because of course the book is not just about, well, it is just about fencing content, but not just like direct fencing
Exactly.
instructions. Sorry, that's my fault because the book contains a very unique thing. It contains probably the best reservoir of knowledge on the fencing guilds and especially Marx Bruder or Marcus Bruder, or I mean the really long name they had, like Jungte Sancta Maria Frauen, blah, blah, blah. Sorry, I don't remember it now. So the book is a composite. So it means it wasn't like directly written by Medal in particular. I mean, we just call it Medal because it's the name which appears here and there, and it is. I mean, I think yeah, the glossa, which is there, was written by a guy called Medal, and when we so the composite also contains multiple parts. The original treatise has the fencing regulations or the chronicles of Augsburg Fencing Guild, fencing regulations or the chronicles of the Frankfurter Fencing Guild, which was like the main fencing guild. Then it has the fencing content, which is like the glossas or commentaries on Liechtenauer's art. And then it contains also Medal's own fencing instructions, which are called seven stances or seven guards. I mean, you do you. And then it also contains some very nice drawings or, well, pictures, illustrations by Martin Hemskerk or, well, two other guys who probably either ripped Martin Hemskerk off or they just made a license to reproduce those pictures. All right, so that's the full content of the book.
Mhm.
And like you said, this is extremely interesting because it's one of the, well, we don't really have that much sources in depth, that much in depth about fencing guilds, and the research that has been done before is like very basic still. Okay, even though
Mhm.
a lot of people are doing amazing research, like I don't know if you follow the blog of it's an evergreen blog by Lion Clark.
Mm, I don't think I have
No, no.
seen
So
it.
so he mostly he I think he started as a blog about Joachim Meyer and about like things that he was able to dig out in the archives about Joachim Meyer's life, but now it kind of spread in all different directions, and he was able to dig really interesting like social info on the life of fencers in general. And nevertheless, these fencing regulations and these chronicles that appear in the so-called Medals Fechtbuch are still probably one of the best sources we have on general on fencing guilds, right? And they are amazing because what they describe is how those guilds functioned back then. For instance,
Mhm.
they say what it took for some person to become a fencing master, because of course we have the situation quite romanticized. We think that, oh, you know, this we have this ideal of a fencing master being best and besting all the opponents that there were. And at the end of the day, at the end of the day, we learned that in order to become a fencing master, you need to have money,
Mhm.
time, and
Yeah.
be a bit lucky, going somewhere, traveling somewhere far, and then like swearing that you will, you know, to meet with butchers, with executioners, and a horse and stuff like that. So we can really see what it meant. We can really read about how they were trying to enforce proper behavior at those Fechschulen or fencing schools, which were more or less something in between lectures and tournaments. I mean, there is no like a clear division. So it's an extremely interesting insights into the inner works of fencing guilds. And on top of that, there's the medal instruction, which I think, at least that's my opinion, is like the high point of Fechtschule. So that's like the really high Fechtschule fencing, which had got some specific like rules or limitations, like compared to
Mhm.
regular Liechtenauer teachings.
Hmm. Okay, so yeah, the one of the interesting things, by the way, hello NQTR. Not sure how to pronounce it, but hopefully it's correct. But one of the really interesting things I think is how this documentation you kind of put in the book or what you translated um, really seems similar to what you can experience today in modern fencing clubs. So as I was reading the regulations, you have all of these rules, and some of them sometimes you may be tempted to kind of add a layer of like mysticism of the past, like, oh, I wonder why these rules were there. And sometimes though, you have to read them as there are rules on like like who brings drinks for the fencers doesn't have to pay like the spectator fee or stuff, which is stuff that is so relatable today. You can really imagine someone being, oh, you're again, yeah, if you bring some beers, like you're good to come to the club or something, which kind of makes these names and people really alive, and it's very very cool, I think. And
That there were people like us.
yes, exactly. With the same habits and the same problems, because also a lot of the rules, then, when you think about it, is about maintaining discipline and safety within the clubs. So there's a lot of stuff that, if you see it in practical terms instead of as trying to decipher some kind of super high level content, I think is really, really, it makes a lot of sense and becomes very cool. Also, the fact that some years they ended up with zero money in their coffers after like at the end of the year when they have to transfer the stuff. It's like there was nothing to be given. Um, so this medal, of which we don't know much in terms of his actual biography, would have been in this kind of cultural and social landscape, let's say, a bunch of people from different backgrounds. I think that's also one of the really interesting things is you see how a lot of these people aren't like fighters or knights or some kind of there. You have like a candle maker, I think, leather workers. So as you're saying, it's more a matter of money and dedication in a sense. So what does this tell you, or what did this make you? What were your considerations, let's say, on the state of this style of fencing in the time in which we're seeing it? Like, these are obviously not soldiers. They're not. What is this? Are we looking at a hobby, the birth of a hobby, tradition?
I mean, it certainly was a hobby for many people, but a lot of these people were actually soldiers, and I think this is why it would be good to visit the blog of Lion,
Mhm.
because he explores the archives more and is looking more for those people. And we know that many of the prominent members of the fencing guilds, and especially, I mean, Marx Bruder, were soldiers. Okay,
Mm.
there are many theories on this. There, some people say that it was a project by the emperors to like to create these soldiers that they could use in a different time when they would need. But you know, I don't think there's like a simple solution or simple answer for this, because it was always complex. So as time went, it's like with any society, everything starts kind of romantically and naively. So people think that they are like the best. They want to be the keepers of the art. They want to put the art and keep it secret or whatever. So they create a brotherhood. Then somebody recognizes an opportunity how to get some money out of it, because
Mhm.
as you also might have read in the chronicles, a lot of those individual rules or points are about money distribution. Okay,
Exactly,
so,
yes.
and like you also said, at some point the coffers were empty, there was nothing. Where did it go? Yeah, they certainly were buying swords, right? So, so I think some people were just motivated to get some monetary means from it. Some people really loved fencing. Some people were, just soldiers with nothing to do in the pastime, and they wanted to have a special. Well, I mean, if you were a member of the brotherhood or of the Marksbruder, and this is important, you were able to hold the title of the master of the longsword. So they had the so-called imperial privilege, which means that they had the right to make these masters. So you could not call yourself a master, official master of the longsword, unless you went through the brotherhood. Okay, so it was this served multiple means, or there were like multiple reasons for that. Of course, they were also trying to keep some standards or some norms about like fencing and fencing education in general, but also, of course, to keep the flow, the monetary flow always goes back into the coffers of the brotherhood. All right. So uh, certainly a lot of motivations for different people. I think it also like changed in different eras. And, you know, it's people don't change. I mean, what changes are things around us, but generally, I think what we see nowadays with all the federations and stuff, it was, it's just happening all over again.
Yeah, exactly. Also, this kind of imperial privilege, so this exclusive right to be the sword master and to teach and to induct new masters, didn't really last that long, right? Because I think by the early 17th century, we already see that that monopoly is broken. So, do you think it kind of ran its course, or what do you think was the reason for that?
So again, we can just hypothesize, because if we want to be true to historical research, we would need to find documents which
Mhm.
would exactly state something. So they would say stuff like, "Oh, Marxbruder were super expensive and they were super secretive, so naturally an opposition formed, and that opposition was trying to teach fencing back to the masses or whatever." Okay,
Yeah.
we don't have a document like that, so we can only hypothesize that, of course, as it is customary in social context, there were opposing groups which didn't agree with perhaps the way they fenced. They perhaps thought that those masters are asking for too much money because they have a monopoly. And we know that the so-called Freifechters or Federfechters or whoever they were, because they were, of course, multiple of these brotherhoods, were active at least from 15th, from the end of 15th century or beginning of 16th century. Uh, they were they were definitely competitors, because we have a lot of documents, poems, etc., telling the stories about infighting between stories of fighting between the Marxbruder and the
Mhm.
Federfechters or Saint Vitus Fechters or whatever, up to the point that they were kind of normalized and they had their own rights, or at least an amount of rights. And we can also read this in the specifically in the medal in the Augsburg fencing regulations, where they say that if that every Freifechter, they call them Freifechter in there, so free fencer, sorry, uh, has the right to make another Freifechter. So they already had some rights which were
Mhm.
perhaps not imperial. I mean, I don't know. That's for historians to find and or confirm by documents, or perhaps it was just like a city-wide thingy that was existing there. So they had the right to exist, they had the right to create new members, and they were not obliged to pay to Marx Brothers. Okay, and that's very important, because it means that they were recognized as a normal existing group and they had their own rights, up to the point where, and like you said, in the early 17th century, there is another group. I think that was in Prague by Rudolf II. Federfechters or fencers from the Feder got their own rights, so that we had two fencing guilds educating fencers officially with the so-called imperial privilege.
Cool. So yeah, by the way, this kind of whole guild situation reminds me a lot of the city guards you see in the Netherlands, where it's a mix of like martial role, but it's also networking and like a way of showing power and wealth. So there's all of this, yeah, complex series of reasons why people end up joining. Okay, so
There's
back to yes,
if I just may, there is a
absolutely.
really nice book by Ant Lusty, and it's called Martial Ethic in the early medieval Germany, I think. And the book is very good because it gives you an idea how violence or well guilds in general were incorporated in medieval, let's say, in struggles and how the guilds were obliged to, I don't know, care for certain guard some towers, have some sort of arms, and how individual citizens were
Ooh,
obliged to
yeah.
own weapons and stuff. And you know, we can only comment on these things from the documents we see, especially from things like that. But it was like a complex societal issue where every citizen in German lands was obliged kind of to participate in the larger like defense. So it definitely goes through all levels of society.
Yeah. So, hello, Camilo, by the way, welcome. And on this aspect that you mentioned about we can only see what we have, and that kind of informs our view of things. I think this is where maybe one of the big questions around middle pops up because you mentioned in your book that there's overall a certain homogeneity, let's say, when talking about Liechtenauer in general, and then he pops out like as this, okay, I have a different vision of things based on the same origin text and everything. So do you think he was actually an exception, or maybe have we just lost a whole bunch of other people? Like, was Lichtenauer so one way in terms of interpretation, or do you think that there was a whole bunch of different ways people approached him?
Those are really good questions because all right, so let's cut to the chase. Medal is very unique, but
Hmm.
traces of, let's call it medalism, appear all over the place. So if you start looking well into the manuscripts and if you start looking at some development of fencing, you will notice here and there are like little traces, for instance, of different nomenclature of guards. As early as the so-called Döbringer manuscript or the Paul Hausbuch, whatever, uh, if you read the passage on guards, you will notice that also those guys they use the name Flug for what we understand as Albert, for instance, right? And usually when people read it, you're like, oh, this must be some kind of a mistake. But there are too many of these little like
Hmm.
mistakes or corrals. For instance, one of the best treatises with well, one of the treatises with best illustrations and pictures unfortunately doesn't have almost any text. It's called, nowadays we call it Cluny manuscript. It's currently resting in Paris. And before that, it was known as Donauen, Shingen, MS, whatever. And so this book has around 400 or 500 illustrations. It's really like a thick book. And there's maybe 20 or 30 textual additions to the book. And one of those is when you get to the positions, they are showing like how to hold the individual positions. And there's a little text which says, but some people call this ox, some people call this flug,
Hmm.
etc. Right? Then when you go to Paul's Hector Mayer's things, of course, he mentions some very specific principles from that book, and also many of his techniques are influenced by the way how Medal teaches things. All right, so there are clues here and there all over the place, the meta naming. So then it makes you question which came first, right? The
Hmm.
chicken or the egg. Okay, and of course, the if we take all the evidence and if we stay honest to the evidence, let's say 95% chance, there is a 95% chance that, of course, the traditional, let's say, canonical sources that we have on Liechtenauer are correct, whatever that means, okay? Because there's also like a very tricky word, like a tricky word, like what does it mean to be correct, right? But let's say they are like correct. But there is a chance, albeit very small, but that Medal was the one who was right, right? And we have to
Hmm.
take it into account and we have to see in the big picture because a lot of things that he teaches, well, not a lot of things, everything he teaches makes complete sense. Okay? It makes it makes a huge sense and it works as quasi as a complete system. Well, the only unfortunate thing is that it's unfinished or lost.
Hmm.
Hard to say because Paulus Hector Mayer, when he acquired the manuscript, we know according to his own notes that it already didn't have the finished. The number of pages was the same. So we he's definitely original, but there is like a small chance that he is correct, that this book contains the real teaching of Liechtenauer. I mean, of course, probably not, but if we want to be like honest, like researchers, we have to like assume things. Okay,
Mhm.
so I wouldn't say that he's unique and alone. I would say that there are traces of Medelism, or at least of some approaches everywhere. Okay, and
Okay.
also like here's the thing, like we do not really have a work left by Lichtenauer. There is no book which says like this was written by Master Lichtenauer and this is my own stuff. Okay, as far as we know, also there is evidence like Beringer and some like other traces of some poems showing that most probably even Lichtenauer, if he existed, etc., etc., also borrowed a lot of other stuff into his own teaching. So
Mhm.
the question, there's always like the question of the chicken and the egg, like what was sooner. So more or less, I am convinced that it's not really about like diversion of Lichtenauer's art, although that is of course possible. I think that there were like multiple streams of something
Mhm.
existing like at the same time, which had smaller and larger diversions. And well, Medel is probably the biggest one. Probably the biggest one, as far as we can tell, because it is there in the text. It's not just pictures, so it's there written in the text, and we can deduce that.
So then again, speculating, so big speculation alert. But would you say that then Medal wasn't a contemporary of what we're looking at in the Augsburg school and Frankfurt school, but would have been almost Lichtenauer, like alternative, or would it have been a commentary? Like,
Probably not. Probably not. Probably not. And the reason why I don't think so is because of the terms he's using.
hmm,
The He is using some very specific terms which we see appear in Renaissance. Okay,
okay.
and so I think that well, we can presume that Medel's work was written or finished in 1539, I think, if I remember correctly, and that was the time. There's like a little date at the beginning of that. I mean, it might be the date of acquisition, it might be the date of finish. We don't really know, but the whole art and also the illustrations, if they were not added later, if it wasn't like transcribed or copied by Pablo Hector Meyer or someone close to him or whatever, uh, I think it would be fine to tell that Medal is someone who probably lived and fenced sometime between 1500 and 1530. And again, because of the style, and this is again just my personal assumption, I think that the style really fits Fechtschule, so fencing schools. And I wouldn't say it's not martial. That's not the real word. It is very martial, but it really fits a customary fencing school with some special, maybe limitations or special approaches to which are
Mhm.
more reminiscent of civilian fencing than,
Yeah.
let's say, actual battlefield.
Yeah.
But it's a terrible way of putting things together. Sorry.
This is really interesting also because it shows kind of the importance of the original text, not only a good translation, but if you miss out on the context, let's say, like the insights you can bring having, let's say, being able to recognize language changes across decades is kind of crucial to not fall into these possible misinterpretations. So when we're looking then at, so you mentioned one of the big differences is, or one of the most obvious differences between Medel and Lichtenauer is the different nomenclature he uses for different techniques or stances. Uh,
Techniques. Yeah.
but but is it
Uh,
limited? Yeah, sorry.
no, I'm sorry. I'm
Oh,
listening.
okay.
Sorry.
Is it limited to just reinterpreting the meaning of words, or does he bring, what's the extent of how much he improves or changes on these techniques, let's say?
A huge extent. It's a huge extent because he has got a completely different style. All right. So, for instance, his art is heavily reliant on the so-called crooked positions. Okay.
Mhm.
And when we say crooked positions, we differentiate between like straight, pointed, and crooked always goes a bit on the side. So he's absolutely overusing crooked things everywhere. And he has got a system which I really like. And again, there are traces of it in the one of the presumably oldest Liechtenauer fencing books, the Dobringer Fechtbuch or HS 3227A. He has a so-called system of Ansetzen, Absetzen, and Aufsetzen. Okay, so for those who do not speak German, it's like setting on, setting aside, and sitting on. Okay, so traditionally we understand them as, let's say, Ansetzen is a way of impaling or sticking your point into something. Absetzen is a parry with a simultaneous thrust, and Aufsetzen doesn't really exist in the other Liechtenauer sources. But for instance, Medel differentiates between a few specific positions, which are usually held somewhere on the side like crooked, and he uses them to make a thing which he calls Absetzen, which is usually something that we could understand as a beat parry. All right, so we're trying to cut something away, and that's the Aufsetzen, sorry, Ansetzen is waiting in a special guard which is ready to set on something. Then he's setting something aside, and then he's sitting on something in a guard, like waiting, because
Hmm.
he's a big proponent of waiting. Oh, this is the interesting fact I didn't note, that didn't mention sooner. uh, the medal guy, the one of the reasons why this book is special and why it really talks to me also in other way is because the guy, either the guy who wrote it or both the guy who wrote it and who wrote a little marginalia, whether it was the author or someone else, was a very knowledgeable fencer. Okay, there's a handful of little notes that they left over there, and they look like being written like slightly by a slightly different hand. It's really difficult to tell 100%. I mean, you can have an opinion on it. And those little notes, they tell you stuff like, some people do it like this, but I don't like it.
Hmm.
Or they tell you stuff like, uh, there's this Lichtenauer commentary which says like always be for, which means like always have the initiative,
Yes.
always attack first, right? Always be for and always attack, da, da, da. And then there's this little marginalia or well insertion which says like, nah, you don't really have to, right? And think about it. Think about it, how amazing it is because on one hand, we have this like a HEMA god. Okay, let's call him like
Mhm.
HEMA god because everybody's like, oh, Lichtenauer, that was the grandmaster, biggest masters of them all, even though we know absolutely nothing about him, and there's
Yeah.
probably nothing that he left, right? And everybody's like just copying the stuff because this is the holy text of swordsmanship, right? And this guy goes against it. He is not afraid to state his own personal opinion. And like, mind you, this is Renaissance. This is when people started to speak their own mind, like all deities are dead. And last but not the least, the opinion that he's stating is not bad at all. It the guy, every single remark he makes, every single note that he puts in there, it's very intelligent, absolutely makes sense, and you can feel that that guy was a competent fencer. Okay,
Hmm.
so beside being like a very competent commentator who is not afraid to say even stuff like, I don't like this. I don't do it. Okay. I do it differently. Like very brave for 1500 and for fencing. Okay. Who is not afraid to say like, I have like this different style of doing things. Uh, makes has some techniques which are really different, has like a very different approach, even says sometimes it's like much better just to wait on the other guy and it means this and this. So it's a very like radically, well, not radically of course, because like I said before, fencing is limited. I mean, two hands, one sword, etc. But the approach he has and the logic he's trying to build in your head is very different to what we, or at least to the impression that we have from
Yeah.
the Lichtenauer sources.
So if you had to, I don't even know if it's possible, but let's say, could you, let's say, put in parallel where the principles of Medel differ from, let's say, the principles of Lichtenauer? Or is it more a matter of specific techniques where there's like, oh, I do this different and I prefer this in a different way?
I mean, uh, so we would really have to go into like a very deep analysis of the sources because uh, we can read the sources in multiple layers, and it doesn't matter if it's like
Mhm.
fencing sources. This goes for any historical source. So you can be, let's call it naive. Naive means that you read the stuff and you understand it as it is given to you. Okay, so
Mhm.
there's no like super hidden meaning. You take those people for being like completely honest, and you take the stuff as it is written. Then we can have, let's say, let's call it like a critical approach, or like a and a critical approach means that we already have some experience with a particular field. Again, it can be it is fencing in this particular case, but it doesn't have to be. And you read someone telling you a particular opinion. Okay, so I, as a fencer, I have been fencing for those 22 years. I have had, I don't know, 10,000 sparring bouts, and this is my experience. And somebody tells you like, always cuts at the body, never at the sword, and you're like, well, not necessarily,
Mhm.
not necessarily, right? So then you are looking for some hidden clues and hidden information. So you are trying to put it into a specific context because also Liechtenauer, all we have are just these wild proclamations which say this was the grandmaster, this is like really good, this is the best thing ever, and everything else is just a copy of this thing, right? That's what they tell you, right? That's what they're trying to sell you. But we can also deduce on some of those like little clues that again are everywhere, that it was fencing which was working in a very specific context, or fencing, better said, that moved between context. Okay, because nothing is like finite, and this
Mhm.
dichotomy is a little strange also, like for medieval people. So if I use this like a naive approach, and if I was using my first impression, and let's say if I was a completely, if I thought that the masters are completely honest with you and everything they say is correct, I would say that Lichtenauer really pushes everything forward and tries to work with the Vorschlag, Nachschlag, etc., etc. Hans Medel, on the other side, takes you to tells you to take a more cautionary approach, and he is talking more about waiting and about using the right moment for the right reply, depending on what your opponent says. Okay, again, this is not very precise. I'm not, not saying it's like 100% like this, but
Mhm.
by this superficial, naive reading, you can tell one guy tells you just go for it, and the other guy says play with him. Okay, so that would be probably a good naive thing. And then critically, critically, I think both guys are correct, but both guys are working in slightly different context. I think that the core traditional Lichtenauer is closer to what we understand as a sharp duel, although not exactly, again, not exactly,
Mhm.
but I'm saying closer, okay? So no, that much close, like closer. And Medel is closer to a more regulated Fechtschule, okay?
Okay.
Okay, but then again, this is like very tricky to say. There are also like other sources, like I don't know if you're familiar with Johannes Leküchner. That's
No.
a Messer master, Messer like the one with the
Yep.
single-edged weapon, and he was living also approximately by the time when peak Lichtenauer was happening, and he left us with a huge book, 430 pages of Messer, like really thick, big book with so many illustrations. And basically, this guy, even though it presents itself as like a martial art kinda, he makes so many references to Fechtschule and says like this stuff is done on Fechtschule, this is great for Fechtschule, this is good for making money. That
Mhm.
again, dividing those things like sharply in one direction is very tricky because again, those people were selling some stuff under some were trying to create some impression. But let's say Lichtenau is tad closer to what would be probably just practical sharp fencing, and Medel in particular is that closer to what would be more regulated fencing school.
Okay, so let's bring some controversy in. Which one would you think would be the better master for modern HEMA? If we look at this too.
No controversy there. I would say study both. Like
Okay, yeah.
seriously, like
Uh,
you know, I know that some people are pursuing what they see as a clean art, or they say that I just want to do ringek, for instance, right?
mhm.
Which is kind of nice because you want to go just in one style. You don't want to have any interruptions, etc., etc. But it is the year 2025, if I remember correctly, and
For a few
yeah,
months
and
yet.
oh Jesus, man, it's October already. So
Yep.
it passed really quickly. So it's 2025, and frog DNA, or what we call frog DNA, is unavoidable. Everything is tainted. Okay, every of our opinions, every of our physical actions, it's already tainted by the things we wear, by the protection that we can have. Okay, by the swords that we use, by the hundreds of years of knowledge from warfare, from other martial arts, from I don't know, kendo, uh, whatever, koryu, etc. Okay, so we will never, never, never like be able to be like fully just concentrated on one source. Okay, even if you think so, you are still functioning in an environment which is like tainted. Okay, weird
Mhm.
word, but I'm gonna keep using it. So I think even if we somehow invented time travel and if we took a historical master straight out of 1487, okay, that guy would be extremely eager to watch all the YouTube videos of fencing, to visit all the tournaments, to use all of our fencing gear, etc. And last but not the least, all of those guys were just compiling stuff. Also, the Liechtenauer sources tell us this guy traveled many lands, and
Mhm.
he hasn't made the art up. He compiled and combined stuff which was available and made it better somehow. Okay, I mean somehow we don't especially know how. Well, probably with the Linden system or whatever, but he just made it better. So they were already doing like these complex chunks of things. And I think if we want to become better fencer, there is no better way than to mix everything that is available, then to try every piece of knowledge, and then to find your own individual style which fits you the best. Okay, as a competent fencer, the more you will practice, the more you will grow as a person, as a fencer, etc. The more you will read stuff like this, okay, not necessarily my book, I mean the sources, the more those people who are long dead will be speaking to in different language. You will be able to approach them critically, to understand and see the things they were saying as a fencer, because you will be able to put them in a certain context. You will also kind of go and remember the situations that happened to you, because maybe this one time at one tournament you try this and then you're like, ah, eureka, eureka, I had the same approach. And this is how you become the better fencer. And if a certain particular style, for instance, is if this medal speaks to you more because you really like his approach and you really get the waiting with the crude cut positions, and you see the simplicity of just moving your arm somewhere, and this sounds really and he says like this action is faster than the traditional way, and you agree with him, go and do medal, but
Mhm.
always be yourself.
Yeah. Well, did metal have an influence on your fencing?
Now, not much by now, because not well, little time has passed. I would say that maybe
Okay.
probably this question will be better in a few years. I mean, uh, it was the other way around, like the experience I already had, and also the things I saw with other people
Hmm.
enabled me to understand metal more, because there are so many people nowadays, and thanks to, I mean, we already spoke about it a while ago, but thanks to the immense experience of the community in sparring, in tournaments, etc., etc., we are able to witness, either personally or through some media, so many different fencing situations. And you can see, and the whole scene is so advanced that you can really see fencers using the principles of, let's say, particularly this master of Hans Medel, or whoever wrote the treatise. You can see those things in movement already. Okay, so even I was using certain things that he says. So for instance, here's the thing. There's this action which is called duplieren. Okay, and duplieren is a relatively simple action when after an attack you make a second attack or secondary attack behind the opponent's blade in order to hit them. That's like the canonical duplieren. Okay,
Mhm.
but Hans Medel, he uses the name duplieren for, I'm going to say something else, but not really, but just stay with me. He says that duplieren is the action after you parry someone or bind with someone, and if they are going to cut you from the other side, you put the sword underneath their sword, and that's duplieren. And here's the thing, it makes sense. Of course, I was calling it duplieren before because Liechtenauer says that we always have two different windings or turns
Mhm.
on both sides, and he only names one of them as a duplieren, right? But of course, there's this other way of making the duplieren, and there's absolutely zero reasons to not call it duplieren. And I was doing it for, I don't know, for decades, for how much long. And then when I got to read Medal, and Medal says, "Oh, so this is duplieren," I'm like, "Yeah."
Mhm.
And then also. He has got a very good nomenclature. He's one of the first guys to use the nomenclature of open and crossed positions. So he says like this position is
Mhm.
closed or crossed, and this position is open, which is like, we've been using it for decades, but again, I never really knew it's from Medal. So ever since I saw that he uses this nomenclature, I was like, I'm not alone. Okay, here's this guy, and he's like saying this, and he saw it in the same way, right? So those are the little things.
Which is also quite interesting because when you take the verses, like the Lichtenauer source, let's say, it's very, yeah, it's very, in a sense, dry. It's a content that is for initiated people, in a sense, for who already knows. It doesn't really
Yeah,
go into explanation. Whereas Medel's commentary is quite rich instead, in a sense. It really goes into a lot of detail, which is very cool, but I think also makes you question, because when you think, yeah, if our whole source is just these verses, there's a lot of empty space that needs to be filled somehow. So it can be through experience, but it also makes sense that at the time, people would have been wondering the same questions we wonder today, how to fill those gaps, I suppose.
sorry, you dropped out a
Oh,
little.
okay. Yeah. Well, I was just saying, yeah, that the same way we today, if we didn't have all the commentary and the glosses and everything, would need to fill those gaps in. We can imagine people at the time having to do that as well. Not everyone was the direct disciple of a great master. So there must have been a lot of the same kind of exercise we do when we go through and what exactly is this? How do we? And then you test it out. Um, would you say that for a beginner, should a beginner start? Let's put it this way: pick up Medel, or should a beginner pick up the Lichtenauer and then develop his like and then see the variants? Because
Oh,
I think on the one hand, it's almost a philosophical issue here. It's like, do we keep Lichtenauer as the pillar and then build around it, or do we say, oh, Medel is also has his own stand by himself?
so hear me out.
Yes.
Give me give me $1 million, give me an island, give me 10 people who have never fenced before, and I will lock them with Hans Medel. I would personally, I would seriously, personally, just in order to see the clash of cultures and backgrounds, I would love to see guys who would pick up Medel as their very first contact into the world of HEMA. Okay, because you know, again, for me, and I guess for most people who will decide to study this book. It is and it was and it will be confusing because it contradicts what we understand and recognize as canonical. All right,
Hmm.
but certainly for people who has never read original Liechtenauer, or I mean, when I say Liechtenauer, I mean of course the book available in the whole portfolio before, Medal would be absolutely normal. There's no reason for
Hmm.
Medal not to be normal. I think they would only have some difficulties in understanding the classical nomenclature, because I already know, or you or other people, we already know what's an Oberhau. People already know what's a Krumbhau, okay? And figuring it out just on this like short text can be a little difficult. I think people could totally do it, and I really wonder how would they fare in a, let's say, not necessarily tournament setting, but also in sparring setting. I think they would have some difficulties because medal would be really working within a specific group. I think if you applied medal into Blossfechten in general, and when I say Blossfechten, I mean those people who prefer to play without much protective equipment, so more or
Hmm.
less maybe with your gloves and maybe with your mask, sometimes even not, it would really work. But they would have some trouble with people going really for it. Okay, so if they probably met some of those super flashing Lichtenauer super fast thrusters and it would be a little complex, but an experienced fencer, a really experienced fencer who understands distance, tempo, who understands timing and distance, which is like a tempo, and understands strategy and tactics, at least on some level, would be able to work with medal quite successfully. Because at the end of the day, medal has most of the stuff which Lichtenauer has, only with a slightly different approach, which you need to be able to use tactically. Okay,
Hmm.
you need to be employ stuff in the right time from the correct distance. I mean, and this is of course true for all of fencing. Okay, unless you know how to do that, I mean, you will generally suck in fencing. Maybe with some luck you will get some randomly okay results, right? So so just to sum up, I would love to see that as an experiment. I would really love if some of the schools or some study groups decided to get really good with medal and just throw it into the pool of experimental fencing. But I would suggest to most people, because it's really well developed, to start with regular Lichtenauer, because also like in the way how fencing developed, it makes sense to get like here from here, because this is
Yeah.
like a better basis than the other way around.
Yeah.
I mean, I cannot imagine, if we are confused by
Yeah.
what we read in Medal, I really am trying to imagine the people, like how much people would be confused if they started with Medal and went back to the to Lichtenauer.
Yeah. That's the problem, I guess, of our availability of options today. Because if you at the time went to a school that had that, you would learn that, and that would be your fencing style probably. Whereas today we kind of pick up a style, then want to learn a next one, another one, and then in that sense, it makes sense the way you're saying. Of course, you want to start from the root, let's say. Um, so you mentioned the aspects of like the timing and distance and stuff. Does, in your opinion, Medel have a different interpretation, or does he take that part of Lichtenauer and just give a different importance to the like the waiting part, or does he kind of change the the meaning, let's say, of the for and nach and inden and stuff?
To some extent, like he's a proponent of waiting. He says it in multiple places. Also, in his part of the seven stances, he talks about like waiting in nach, so waiting for what your opponent is doing. For instance, like sitting on the blade and stuff. So I think the basics are the same.
Mhm.
There's just a little more stress on not really rushing and really waiting for what your opponent is doing in order to get a good reaction going.
Cool. Um, How do you think, after, in terms of what we're seeing, because a lot of what we're talking about tonight reminds me a little bit of certain discussions you have in the HEMA environment or with people who do HEMA. So, like the difference between wanting to, as you mentioned, rebuild pure technique in a sense versus an approach that is more into creating fencing as a developing thing that builds new techniques and the kind of works in the world it exists in. What are your thoughts on kind of modern HEMA? Which of these two directions, how they blend together, let's say?
I mean, I prefer a holistic approach, you know. I think that when people talk about the traditional or sporty ways, I think it's mostly like false dichotomy and very bad marketing. I mean, obviously it works with most people. It works, but I think we should have a holistic approach. Like, why not just do the thing? Like, you know, I think everybody is able to differentiate between like a friendly tournament and let's say a duel to the death if it
Mhm.
like ever occurred. Like, hopefully not. Like, I mean, I sincerely doubt that any of the historical fencers really wanted to die in a duel or whatever. That they were
Mhm.
mostly having fun in their Fechtschule and every Sunday behind some church or on some city square. So I think people should really try. If you want to get fencing, you should try all of it. Okay, you should definitely try tournaments. You should try sparring. You should try perhaps even blossfechten. I mean, with enough carefulness, just to see how it really changes things when you're not wearing enough protection. You know, but again, uh, all the knowledge that you can gain from any of those individual, let's say, parts of HEMA is limited. Okay, any.
Mhm.
So sport is limited. Even dying from a duel is limited, and I'm not sure about the feedback that you will get from it, right? Even Blossfechten is limited because in order for both of you to, well, no, I wouldn't say survive, but let's say get out unscathed requires you to be a bit careful or at least to have some level of understanding and cooperation and stuff. So, you know, it's like the Venn diagram. So, in order to
Mhm.
get fencing, you should really get the biggest chunk out of every single one of those. So, I don't really think that there is a particular way that HEMA should concentrate on. But on the other hand, it is true that HEMA thrives because of tournaments and because of the, let's say, sporty side. Okay.
Mhm.
Because of tournaments, we have better gear, we have better swords, we have better protective equipment. I mean, it's getting better. I mean, something slowly, but they are getting better. Thanks to tournaments and thanks to the sports, we have, I don't know, 100,000 people in the world who practice HEMA. We have a huge migration. We have wonderful videos and everything. Okay, so I think that if some of the parts would get some recognition for particular growth of some area, it would be definitely more the sporty side. But without people who were translating, without people who were holding a book in one hand and the sword in another, there wouldn't be no sporty HEMA, etc. So it will always go hand in hand, and you know everybody who's capable of differentiating between a sporty and a different activity will just get the differences, right?
Yeah. One of the topics that came out in some of previous conversations with sword makers and with a few of the people I talked to in general is the difference between also modern swords, like the modern build, modern steel, and what we see from objects of the past. Uh, is this something you've looked into? Is it something you have kind of strong opinions on, or from your point of view?
We don't really have strong opinions about it, and you know, a sword is a tool, and of course, there are some aspects of the tool that will influence the behavior of the sword. Okay,
Mhm.
as a also a sword maker, I have access to hundreds and hundreds of swords every month, and of course, I've also owned, I also still own plenty of swords from other brands. Okay, and I think the swords should be made and used uh, in a way, depending on what you want to do with them. Okay, so
Mhm.
for instance, if we want to do safe sport, we should also like adjust the tool so it fits. Okay, so that's one thing. Of course, if I want to cut, let's say, some tatami mat, okay, I will probably get a sharp sword with a heavier sword with a POB far away. I will also like sharpen it exquisitely so it will cut better. But then again, if I'm in a sporty environment, I don't want to hurt my friends. I want to be able to fence 5 times a week, all right? Uh, and for that particular reason, we need swords which are adjusted to that particular activity.
Mhm.
So let's say they don't hit with as much mass, as much power. They are flexible enough so during an impact, and it doesn't matter if it's like a cut or thrust, there is some vibration to them, so the force kind of dissipates and stuff, right? So I'm more, I feel more as a like let's say like as a specialist who is choosing their own tool for a particular purpose. Okay, so I don't have a strong opinion about like we only have to use these and these swords. It really depends on what you want to do. Okay,
Mhm.
and as far as the historical swords go, it's a little bit difficult. Okay, and I will tell you why. And I think if Julian is still watching us, he will definitely disagree. But you know, we have maybe 20, 25 feathers surviving. Okay, provenance on most of them is very questionable. When I
Mhm.
say it's questionable, like we can say with some of those that they are certainly old, some are older, but some of them are definitely like fakes, which were made in 19th century, or maybe it was just a sword which was like made according to another historical sword, etc., etc. And I think as a community as a whole, we're drawing too many conclusions from too little a sample. Okay,
Mhm.
so if during history they were, I don't know, if between 1400 and 1600 there were 500,000 fencers in all of Europe, and they were using 7 million swords. Okay, I mean, driving conclusions from 20 swords, it's very brave. Okay, if we inspect the pictures, if we inspect the illustrations, we can see that those swords were flexible to a large degree. We can see that they were using mostly feathers most of the time because of some reasons. We don't know for sure because, again, there is no single text that would tell us, you historical fencer, you use only this kind of sword with this
Mhm.
shape because reasons, but we can assume because it was safer for the fingers. We certainly know that it helps to protect the fingers, and who knows how it came to be. I mean, maybe protection of the fingers wasn't the only thing why they did it. Maybe it was easier to, I don't know, cheaper to produce, whatever. So I don't really think that we should draw exact conclusions from historical specimen.
Mhm.
We should definitely examine them absolutely up to the date where they were, or proximate dating, up to their chemical composition, because that's always interesting, up to the properties that they probably have by making reproductions.
Mhm.
But then again, in my hands as a fencer, you know, if I'm using a sword which has got 8 centimeters POB versus a sword which has got a POB of 5 centimeters, or a sword which is like stiffer or softer, it doesn't really change your portfolio that much. It's not like I take two different swords and suddenly with this sword I'm only twerking, and with the other sword I'm suddenly like being able to cut every parry completely through, right?
Mhm.
I'm choosing the portfolio. The only thing which changes, which really changes, is the feeling at the end of your blade where the person at the other end can be hurting, can be hurting a lot when you can cause injuries and stuff.
Mhm.
So I think it's much more worth to stay on the safer side and rather to provide a safe and good environment with using tools which are made according to a very specific purpose. Like, uh, so I don't really think that as a community, if every single person would be using reproduction of the Turek feathers, whatever, I don't really think it would change fencing that much or at all.
Mhm.
Uh, And I think that we should rather concentrate on using tools built for specific purpose, with specific dimensions, and with specific things in mind.
Okay. And in that sense, as a sword maker, do you see some improvements in light of, let's say, the uh, sport aspect and the safety aspect? And let's say, do you see some improvements that you would think would benefit the and that don't obviously damage your plans for production? Like, I'm not asking you to give away any secrets, but is there something you would change, so to speak, or something that you feel could be improved on, or are we kind of in a world where the
General,
swords are good enough? Yeah.
I think everything is as it's supposed to be. Okay,
Okay.
so it's only natural that SIGI, our company, is the extension of our philosophy. Okay, it's not just me. There are many people, and also my business partner, and we come from a specific environment, and we have some philosophy. And I don't want to talk for others, but I am a big proponent of the bottom up approach. And bottom up means that we build things from the basis, and we I don't want to create like a federation which will say only use this and nothing else, okay? Because I think that that would hurt everybody. Even though on a personal level, I think that people using the lighter sword would benefit the whole community much more than people using the heavy
Mhm.
swords, but whatever. So I think right now everything is as it's supposed to be. Okay, people are recognizing that particular swords and particular, um, let's say, philosophies are working for them,
Mhm.
and more and more people will recognize it with time. Okay,
Okay.
so I don't really think that I would change something dramatically. I think everything is going well.
Okay. And speaking of Siki, we have a comment here, which about the Maestro having the same total weight as the faders in the Met Museum, so approximately 1,300 grams. So maybe this is interesting to talk a little bit about your, I don't know, design process or how you, the sword maker side of you, let's say. So how, now that you're a writer and a book publisher too, how central is the sword making part in your daily routine?
So I will talk a bit about this
Yes.
comment because this is very interesting. There is a very nice blog. I would also recommend people visiting it by Nathan Claw from Arms and Armor, the company which also makes swords in America. They make beautiful swords and beautiful reproductions, and he has got quite a nice video blog series on the original Met Museum sword. It's a Diefstetter. It's a pair of feathers actually. They're called Diefstetter feathers. They were probably made sometime at 1580. And it's true that I think the weight difference between the our sword, like the Sigi Maestro Light, and the Diefstetter feather is like 13 or 14 grams. It's really like nothing. There is of course difference in construction because the feather is sharp, quite sharp
Mm.
at the end of it, and more or less only flexes in the very last part of the feather. Okay, some people hypothesize that it was because it was made in that way in order to cause a bleeding wound. Okay, that we call
Mhm.
the highest head wound or whatever in the tournament or in the Fechtschule. Again. Uh, maybe maybe not, it's really hard to tell. Probably yes, no, we don't really know. So there is a huge difference between how we make it, because our sword is just inspired by the particular shape, because the shape is beautiful. Also the engraving and the whole engraving, because the original is engraved or well, not engraved, but well, not embossed. Help me with the word. So when you put acid,
Etched.
it's etched. Yeah, sorry, and thank you. That's the word. So it's really nicely etched. So there is a big difference because, of course, we make the sword again for tournaments. It's and practice. It's supposed to be flexible enough that it flexes in thrust, and light enough so it doesn't hurt. So those two swords are very different. But salty fruits stated, and Marsden also stated, there are even
That's one
lighter
of it.
swords and lighter feathers in existence, right? So that's absolutely true. And regarding the work in SIGI, at SIGI, SIGI is I sometimes joke I didn't want to work from 9 to 5, so I started working 24/7. So SIGI is a relatively large company already, like for a fencing business. So we have 23 or 24 people working for SIGI right now. And as someone who is responsible for the administrative part and also for a lot of like generally the business things, so my work doesn't really start or doesn't really end. It's like just continuous work. Okay, so we have like several let's say divisions, although we're more like McDonald's in the way that everybody almost makes everything, because sometimes some people need to also pack swords if there's really a lot of things to pack. But
Mhm.
let's say we have like administration, we have general production, then we have like a thing we call logistics, and also like a heavy machinery and stuff like engineering. uh, the design process is the best, probably the best part, because we've got so many ideas. I mean, if we could, we would probably just like spider shoot swords out of our hands. And our employees also in their free time, they also make their own swords. So, like, it's not always feathers. They also make some replicas for themselves and stuff. And we're also always prototyping something. But when we designed the swords, of course, ever since SIGI began, we had some outline or general ideas where we are and where we want to get to. Of course, that also changes with environment and with time. For instance, light swords were kind of new thing, because I think the first time I really like handled and sparred with a light sword, that was in Paris 2 years ago, when I was invited to teach at for not only the Parisian clubs but generally for some French people. And as soon as I started playing with light swords, I immediately recognized the potential. I immediately knew that this is the future. So
Mm.
we kind of went at it, and we designed our first types. Okay, so when you design the swords, of course, there are multiple phases, because there is a thing which we call the SIGI feel trademark. Okay, and the SIGI feel means that our swords have certain qualities like flexibility and, let's say, feeling and vibrations, notes, etc., that are relatively easy to achieve for us, because we already know like how to do the grind, how to process them, and there are some things that like we do on the engineering side. So when we design the swords, it always comes down to multiple questions that you need to ask yourself. Like you need to create ideally a unique design. I mean, as let's say within the boundaries of what we're making, because the sword is a sword. But of course, I don't want to make a copy of someone's sword. I want to make a sword which also has some purpose behind the design. So for instance, most of our models, even for instance, we have a sword which is called the SIGI concept. And the reason why it's called the SIGI concept, because it was a concept. It was it was a concept of a feather which would work in a certain way, which would kind of simulate well, I wouldn't say a sharp, but let's say a blunt sword, without sacrificing some of the stuff, or without being a straight like blunt sword, and also like
Mhm.
introducing some qualities to the sword. Because for instance, it's not just about like, hey, I like this shape, let's make this shape, but it's also about like, for instance, hey, we should create a sword which is like really good for thrusting and really good for, I don't know, follow up cut around. So it will talk to a particular group of people. I mean, outside of the aesthetics. And there you get the
Mhm.
maestro, because the original maestro, not the light, because the light is slightly different due to the attributes that we need to do with it. But the original maestro, for instance, was made with a slightly thicker and larger tip compared to other swords, so that it gives you, without sacrificing much of the other qualities, it gives you some extra haptic feedback. For instance, when you work with the sword, you can feel the tip a bit more, and it's easier to get somewhere. Like it's perfect for thrust
Mhm.
and cutting around. Then we wanted to create this. concept or SIGI concept, which was a sword which was supposed to be or is supposed to be like stronger in the in the first half, a bit more stable for wonderful like parry riposte, but mostly for cutting around. Okay, so there's a lot of material which is concentrated somewhere near the thumb, so it gives you stuff like that. So we always first we discuss what and why we want to do, like how does it fit into our well, right now it's into the portfolio because we offer plenty of swords. It's not
Mhm.
just like one or two swords and one new sword. Then we discuss the general aesthetics or what can we do with the sword so it's recognizably like a SIGI, that it kind of fits into our general stuff. And then we usually sketch or create a few prototypes. Of course, our engineers use software and stuff to design new swords. Like first we draw them, then we design it in some CAD or whatever, and then we use 3D printing for prototypes. So first,
Mhm.
before we do the actual sword, we always like 3D print the individual parts so we can like see them, because I mean you put it into a printer and it's out in a few hours. You already have the basic sort ready, and you can fit it into components and see the general like feel, if because if you see something on the computer screen, it's very different to how
Yeah.
it looks in reality. And if we're satisfied with some things, then we make a few of the blades, and then we apply the traditional grind. Then we try to do some little changes to see how the blade behaves, because of course, uh, with the amount of material that you always grind down from something, blades are extremely sensitive to little differences. And then we do tests to see how the edges feel. We do hardening tests, etc., etc. I mean, our quality control is quite good, and also the hardening is relatively stable. So the swords are mostly okay, but you just generally try the sword. And after everything of this, we take the swords and we try to destroy them. That's my favorite part. So, yeah, so uh, maybe we have a surprise just around the corner. I can't really talk about it, but let's say when we do test swords, I really give them a lot of abuse. And when I say a lot of abuse, it's like, you don't just make a sword and sell it straight. I mean, I cut it like crazy. I sometimes throw it on the ground. Sometimes we try to hit it with all the different swords with different hardening, just to see how it generally behaves, how
Mhm.
how easy it is to fix, etc., etc., and then do some measurements. So, and when it passes all those tests, then we start fencing with it. And then we usually hand it out to some of the fencers that we have around. I mean, our club is quite large, so we always have test subjects who are happy to test some new stuff, or occasionally I take it to someone I know and I want to hear their opinion to discuss it. So this is how the process goes. And then that's the worst part, because like making even a car is not that difficult. If you're a good engineer and you understand how car works, you can buy some parts. You can even construct your own motor in your garage. Yeah, that's the
Mhm.
easy part. But making 1,000 cars, which are the same, that's the part.
Mhm.
Okay, and it's the same with swords. So after something is finished, and let's say a product is finalized, and you start making it, uh, then we order our first, well, I call it order, but we make the first batch, let's say, I don't know, 50, 100, or how many of those sorts. And then you need to explain to other employees who might have not necessarily been part of the development process, because of course we have some senior people who are, let's say, senior grinders or whatever, and then everybody gets it into their hands. And then we always fine tune a product even after a year or so. uh, we we kind of try to make it better, because sometimes someone has a better idea on how to do some grind. We change some little characteristic. Mostly these things are completely invisible to people, but if some other sword makers are listening right now, absolutely know what I mean. So, in nutshell, this is the process, and this is why sometimes it takes so long. I know that people are like, "Oh, when is your side sword coming? When you're having this and that?" And it's like,
Yeah, we
you don't get.
literally have that question.
Uh oh, I don't see it. Yeah, yeah. So I mean, side swords have been in the works for a long, long time now. We already had like 5 or 6 different prototypes. We also made some, and we already have like a working design that we want to make. Right now, we're just looking at ways of how to produce it because the problematic part with some swords like side swords, especially, and some complex hilt rapiers is how to make the complex parts. It's not difficult to make a blade. It's
Mm,
not difficult to make a pommel, a handle, etc. But those complex parts they require a lot of work. And our our intention was always to make swords that are durable and really quality built. So we need to find a way of how to produce those swords in really large numbers. Unless we find it, you know, uh, again, sometimes it's also a bit economical. So if, let's say, making stuff up, okay, but if one guy can make 5 swords in 7 hours, okay, and we can sell those 7 swords for a certain amount of money and have certain amount of money coming in because of course we also need to pay our workers and stuff and the business is not really cheap. And if you have a sword like a side sword and let's say the same guy who can make these 7 swords only makes one side sword, so economically it doesn't really make sense to create and to sell for, let's say, an amount which is economical or economical enough. Okay,
mhm,
so then either we take a loss because we understand that we cannot sell, let's say, a side sword for 2,000 euros, a HEMA side sword for 2,000 euros, if that was the same price as those 7 swords, right?
mhm,
So we need to find ways of how to make this same guy who can create 7 swords create 7 side swords in the same time, so we can keep the price low.
mhm.
And prices is the other thing. We are not like in Pakistan, we do not employ children, so it's always like trying to find the middle ground. So I can only answer Marsdan. I can only say soon. And trust me when I say we really, really want to make it. I mean, if we were able to, we would be like selling it for 7 years now. But it's quite a complex process because of the things that I just explained.
We have another question here by Feather Fencer. And in the meantime, I'll remind everyone we're kind of reaching the last 15 minutes. So if you have questions, comments, anything you want to share or ask Martin, this is the moment. So yeah, we have this question by Feather Fencer talking about ideas behind swords. What was the idea behind Gothic? Because it really seems like we like this shape, so let's make it.
Oh, the Gothic was kind of a joke, all right, and it was kind of a joke because some of our competitors, there was a time when everybody wanted like fullers, right? Like, yeah, I want to have sword with here's like, I don't know, 3 fullers in my sword. Here's like 2 fullers, and everybody wanted fullers everywhere. So our engineer from back then, he said like, yeah, people want fullers. Let's give them as many as we can. So he was a big fan of the Gothic game. Maybe some of you know Gothic. Right now it's being remade, and also of like the aesthetics of the Gothic armor. So the Gothic combines. Let's do a sword full of fullers. Let's do this particular shape because this particular shape, the bigger the shield or the shield on the sword, the more stable the blade, and also a very snappy feeling of control because most of the weight of the sword is situated by your hand. So the Gothic is both a joke, not just a joke, but also a particular engineering intention, and the intention, besides like creating an aesthetically, or for some people, aesthetically pleasing sword, it was also about trying to situating all of the mass, most of the mass of the sword into that particular area, as much as to making the tip extremely light, because that's the, if I said before that the concept is like really snappy and flies around, the Gothic is even snappier.
Mm. Cool. So yeah, I think Marsden agrees with you with not paying 2,000 for a side sword, and I don't want it to break either. So
No.
that's I guess, the challenge.
Yeah,
Um,
this is it.
yeah, we have a question, another one by Salty Fruits. Would you offer a Myers rapier side sword? It seems quite modular with your existing product.
I mean, this is no secret, and this is one of the reasons why our side sword is taking so long. It's because we are making it modular, because of course we want to make as many different combinations as possible, you know. I mean, I would be really happy if we could like tailor each sword individually to each user, but again, this is extremely time consuming, and there are certainly like smiths who can do that. But as a company who produces swords en masse, we need to find ways of how to produce it economically. And the side sword that we have developed is modular exactly for this reason. So it can also fit people looking for a Mayer rapier side sword, and also for people looking for more complex shapes. So yeah, so I think, I mean, eventually one day we're gonna satisfy your demand.
Cool.
Yeah,
You
thanks.
yeah. Um, Going back quickly to Medel, just to kind of wrap up on the wait, we still have questions, I think, about sword making. So in the past few years, the swords made a huge progress in how they're made, safety, etc., etc. Do you plan to go into protective gear too? Because it seems like it's left behind.
Absolutely, we've already made plenty of, well, not a plenty, but a number of prototypes for protective gear. I also have some of my ideas, but it's a huge field. It's a huge field to tackle, and it's not really easy right now. So once we are completely finished with everything with SIGI, and when I say completely finished, it means that we are still have some processes that we are doing with our partners, and we need to do them in-house in order to produce quicker and stuff. And once everything is like settled and just running on its own, we will definitely make a leap in the protection equipment eventually. And I absolutely agree with you that it's kind of left behind. But the good news is no longer, because I think due to the things that happened in the past year, and I mean
Mm,
the penetrated equipment
yeah.
in multiple ways, like people who were stabbed, and also some masks failings, and just people recognizing that we cannot really do this much longer with the same stuff that we're using, that we really need to put some pressure and emphasis on standards and norms also with protective equipment. I think right now, as a community, everybody feels that we need to work on this, and it's getting much better, much better. And and the most important step, it's always the community has to ask for it, and the community has to understand what are they asking for. Because if they just want a nice jacket that kind of is reminiscent of historical jackets, I mean, you just send a drawing to your company or to your tailor. But if we understand how, for instance, sport fencing protective equipment works, how mask works, we can finally ask for the good things. Okay, and
Mhm.
much quite a lot of good research has been already done by it. For instance, Jamie McEver is doing really good research. Also, Ullmann fencing in Germany, in cooperation with some fencers, has really put some, let's say, certified equipment. And all the other makers, of course, if they want to stay in the game, they need to adjust. And this is it. Just continue your pressure, continue your demand, write it on social media, create uproar. This is the best thing you can do, because producers are always listening, always
Mm.
listening.
And maybe start practicing Medel with his more prudent approach.
Yeah, 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 yeah.
Cool. So if there are no further questions on the production side, yeah, I'd like to quickly round back to the book. What was your favorite, like, what was the part while reading, now you think, oh, this was the key point for me in the book, whether it's on the documentation part or on Medel's fencing part? Is there like something that stood out to you?
When it finally started to click. right? Because I mentioned it before, like there are always multiple layers and aspects to fencing books. The first one is definitely the mechanical layer, and the mechanical
Mhm.
layer means that, oh, I understand if somebody goes like this, I'm going like this, and then I'm going like this. Okay, that's the mechanical aspect. But once you get under the skin of that particular master, once you realize what is like his general intent, why is he working like that, and this is exactly it. These are the eureka moments that happen with every other master and also with Hans Medel.
Mhm.
So I would say my absolutely favorite part was when it started to make sense and I realized like, I mean, it was just me. It was just me. It's not the guy. It's me. It's always right. The problem is usually you. So
Yeah, it's a
not afraid
sign
to
that
say it.
you're progressing in your understanding. Cool. Is there anything now, having looked at Medel, is there anything you would have changed in your fencing book?
You mean the other one?
Yes, like in retrospect, does this influence any of the things you kind of thought or wrote?
Uh, Not really. Not really. Probably I would add 20 more footnotes, and I'm not sure
Mm.
people would be happy about it. Because if there's one thing which my book is full of, it's footnotes. I mean, just let me check the number. I think we were sometime it was like 800 or something like that. Yeah, like 850 and 840. That's a lot of footnotes, and I would just add another 20. But I mean, I think I already referenced a medal in few places in there because there's some unique stuff in the manual. For instance, there is a master whose name is Seidenfaden, and that particular master, again, we don't know almost anything about him, but that he appears in a collection of masters in a book of Paulus Kahl, where he is a part of the Gesellschaft Liechtenauers and of the original supposed Gesellschaft, whatever that was. Again, naive take, we have to take into account what's written in there. And that Seidenfaden guy is referenced at least 3 times in that book, and perhaps a
Mhm.
little more because sometimes they just say Hans, and you're not really sure if it's like Hans Medel or Hans Seidenfaden. Probably Medel, but then again, critical approach. So uh, I was using and I was referencing this guy because he has got a thing which is called Albert Tag, which is a thing that kind of, depending how you look and how you interpret the thing, kind of fits with its idea into some of the things I was writing about in Fechtbuch Fabian. But apart from that,
Okay.
no, probably not.
But we have a question from Salty Fruits again regarding what you were talking about the clicking aspect. So what was the problematic assumption or approach you had to change to make middle system click?
I kind of had to forget everything about Liechtenauer. So you kind of have to go in there with a clean slate first. Okay, so like again in the phases, you really have to clean your mind and you have to start thinking from the very basic, which is like the positions. That when he says like this is flug, this is ox, etc., you really need to reconfigure your brain into accepting a completely different reality. Okay, and completely different reality, not in the physical manifestation, because of course there are some differences, but different reality on a strategical, tactical approach. Okay, so you need to reconfigure your brain for a moment, be like an open book, like understand that this guy, when he references stuff like absetzen or ansetzen, because it really in the beginning is like krump ansetzen. He says like krump ansetzen, and like, and for him it's like a position, and you're like, but these two words, they don't work together in this way in other books. So after you reconfigure your brain and become open, then it starts to make sense. And after it makes sense, and you can kind of systematize it, and I don't know, you see Lichtenauer, you see the Venn diagrams of Medel and Lichtenauer, and then you can do the critical approach, say like, I would prefer to do this entry, I wouldn't be so sure of doing this entry, but I get what you mean, Mr. Medal.
Cool. And is there any other master you hated so much that we might see a book in the coming years?
Oh man, oh man. Lekirchner, Lekirchner, definitely. So that's the guy I told you about who has
Yeah.
the most comprehensive book on Messer,
Yeah.
right? And I just hate him because it's so comprehensive. There's so much material. Okay, so I was also on a different podcast on Friday. It's gonna go live in a week or two, and we were speaking about Lekirchner for a long time, and just very briefly. So here's the thing. Uh, Lekirchner left us with approximately 400 pages long work on Messer. Okay, there's like I don't know. There's of course some more techniques because sometimes there's more text than pictures. So let's say 500 just for the reference. And there are multiple versions. The version which I present in this book is from the so-called Speyer Codex, and it's abridged. So it means that it's shortened compared to the largest manuscript, the Munich, that we know. But when you translate a thing like this, you cannot, I mean, I could, but I didn't. You cannot just translate this one stuff because it's full of errors. There are so many errors. The guys who were writing it down, who were copying it, they were doing it just next to candles all day long. Their eyes probably they hurt or whatever, or they forgot or slept sometimes. So when they were doing it, so there were so many errors with left, right, this, that, a word missing, like a weird word, etc. So in order to be sure, because of course when you translate the thing, it's not just you cannot just take the text and translate the thing as it is. First and foremost, you need to understand what's written in there. So if you come to a complex passage, and that's like Küchner's specialty, because if you come to a complex passage which says, so you stand with your left foot in front and put your right foot behind the other left foot, and then go with your arm around and wrap it around this foot, and go with this hand, this foot there, and you're like, what is happening? All right. So, and then you need to look at the other versions. So I go to Liechtenauer because it has got quite a nice system of putting those glossas next to each other. I turn on the free or four. I mean, again, depending on which versions you use of Lekirchner, side by side to each other. All right. And it's so much translating, and it's so much unnecessary stuff. Okay, when I say unnecessary stuff, it's nice. I mean, I'm so happy for Lekirchner that he was like 70 years old and that he could, or 60, whatever, and he could recollect 500,000 different grapples and techniques, but most of those are good for, let's say, for Fechtschuln. So let's say somebody, I will tell you this. If if I really wanted to have some material for endless money generation from, let's say, a fencing school, I would teach Messer. I
Yeah.
would teach Messer because it's, hear me out, at the same time, it's most useless of weapons and also most interesting from some aspects because most of the stuff that we can learn with Messer is useless. Okay, Messer is like saber. It's just a super simple weapon, like yeah, 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 yeah. And but the portfolio, the technical portfolio that we have left by Lekirchner is so vast that you can endlessly do like 27 classes just teaching 100 of his special locks or grapples or something, okay, which you will never, never, ever use in sparring or in tournament because either they're extremely complicated or there's just so many that you just don't remember most of them, and you do remember some of the basic ones which also appear, I don't know, in classical or whatever. Okay, so just for the sheer scale of things which exists in Lekirchner, just because of the many errors which are present, either because of the guys who were just writing the
Mhm.
book down, or because maybe he wrote it down like by mistake. I mean, we're all but human. The love-hate relationship was absolutely there, but a different one. This one was mental. The
Yeah.
Medel was mental because it was absolutely breaking my mind, and Lekirchner, it just takes a toll on your attention, like seeing
Yeah.
like all those tongues and like left, right,
I
left,
think
right.
It's one of those cases where you need to be careful what you wish for, right? We tend to think, oh, if only they had written all the details and everything. And then when you have it, you're like, oh no, this is a little too much. We
There's
have
another book.
actually,
Uh, sorry. Yes,
uh,
yes. There is a
yeah.
Petr Vitopil is a Czech fencer. He's a teacher and he leads his own school. He owns and leads the school of Paridon in Czech Republic, and he recently published a book on Lekichner. And as far as I know, it's available in Czech. It's not available in English yet. Maybe he plans to do it. I mean, I can ask him for you, or you can, I mean, definitely ask him whether he plans to do it. I mean, there are multiple books on Lekichner. There's also a book by Jeffrey Forgang. There's also a book by, I think, I don't remember the Polish guys because it's been too long. There's like a, for certain, there are many books on Lekichner. And I mean, my book just contains one of the versions which I like the most, and that's the Speyer version because it's the shortest.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
That's right. I didn't want to interrupt you. You were mentioning another book. No.
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah. I was just
Yeah.
saying that there certainly are other books, and I mostly I read mostly the medieval works, or I guess the vast majority of them. I of course also read and studied a lot of Renaissance or late Renaissance work, and honestly, I can't wrap my hand around some of the masters like I don't know Alfieri or Thibaut. I don't know if you know. Are you familiar with Thibaut, Gabriel?
Mhm.
So
I
that's
mean,
like
yes, but not in practice, let's say.
a friend of mine owns the original. It's
Okay.
like this big. It's like a huge book, like really thick. It's got like a thousand pages, and you know, I I mean, there's a Sean Franklin told me he read it, and I also talked to some people who said that they finished the book, but I don't believe them because the book is just so boring, so boring. Like there's exactly this level, right? There's a level between like a book being still like engaging and giving you interesting information, whereas
Mhm.
like just someone boasting on their knowledge, like some of the Renaissance masters certainly do.
Cool. And on that note, I think if you want a book that is engaging, this one for sure is that. So make sure you pick it up if you're interested in a different take on Liechtenauer. Um, uh, Thank you so much for joining, Martin. And you're always welcome. So whenever you have new swords out or new books, let me know and we can talk about it. So thank you for joining. Thank you, everyone. And see you in the next one.
Thank you for the invitation, Gabriel. It was my pleasure, and thank you for all those who were listening to us rambling for 2 hours. Hopefully, you enjoyed our words. And again, beautiful podcast. It's a very good work that you're doing, Gabriel. So thank you very
Thank
much.
you very much. Good night, everyone. Bye.
Good night.
Ooh.